Our habits of thought are determined largely by the vocabulary we use. Therefore, the use of terminology is extremely critical to good thinking. There was a time when this was considered to be essential to a cultured individual, and one who was constantly refining the precision of his language was regarded as exercising discrimination. Unfortunately, the cultural Marxists have destroyed discrimination as a useful word to be used in a positive sense. Discrimination is really just the assessment of the relative values of things, and its loss as a descriptive of the process of refining one's thinking is truly tragic. Nowadays, an analysis of terminology is appropriate for virtually any discussion because our language has been under assault and being simplified and eviscerated for so long that the poison has spread to all subjects of discussion. I will discuss for the moment the use of two terms, work and employment, which in modern parlance are often taken to be synonyms. The concept of work and workers is quite elusive. For instance, in countries that have suffered communist takeovers, such as post-World War Hungary and Cambodia under Pol Pot, work was defined as what gave an individual calloused hands. And if the local apparatchik examined your hands and found that they were not calloused and thickened by labor, they might shoot you or club you to death on the spot because you were not doing in your life what they considered to be acceptable work. But work can, in our society, encompass many forms of activity of varying degrees of utility. A flagman directing traffic in a construction zone is regarded as doing work. 10 laborers standing around watching a machine dig a hole all day and waiting for their opportunity to contribute 10 minutes to the operation are considered to be doing work. Authors of books argue that they are always doing work because their life experience gets translated into their creative works. And therefore, they have argued that all their lunch meetings and travels to foreign lands should be deductible as expenses for the purpose of calculating income tax. From their point of view, it seems like a legitimate argument to be made. People might be on call, and they could be held to be doing work. They could be on call 24 hours a day and actually be at work when they're sleeping, because at any time they can be summoned to perform their normal economic activities. In the early part of the 20th century, there was an East Indian mathematician who would wake up in the morning and write down mathematical formulas that no one had come up with or had been able to prove. And he said that they were given to him by his family's goddess during his sleep. In a case like this, I think he could legitimately be said to be working while sleeping at night. So what is work? For a physicist, there is a precise definition of work, and it is the displacement of a mass through a distance by a force in the direction of the force. For the physicist, something actually has to be accomplished for his definition of work to hold. There are many applications of the word work in terms of human activity. A work, for example, can be an artistic creation, such as a painting or a sculpture or a concerto or an original riff on a guitar. You can also have non-artistic works. For instance, one can do a charitable work or a philanthropic work or an altruistic work. The distinguishing feature of all these forms of work is that they spring from individual initiative. And this is a context that is inseparable from the notion of work. It's possible to have work done by a collectivity, but when the term is used in this context as well, it will imply that the group is actually accomplishing something. But then, springing out of the Fabian socialist movement, which was essentially a conspiracy originating in the 1880s to infiltrate society and convert it to socialism by stealthy means, a new term came into currency, covering what most people would regard as work. This was the term employment. Employment is, in fact, a very different concept from the usual notion of work, because of necessity, it regards people as things to be used by others. They are being employed. They are not creating out of inspiration and their own personal will. Employment means that persons are reduced to the status of tools of other persons' intentions and will. So the insertion of this term into the discussion of human economic activity involved a fundamental transformation of the interpretation of that activity, where the concept of work and works rules. It is possible to have a society of autonomous individuals responding to their own creative instincts and their own consciences. But in a society where the concept of employment rules, basically you can only have a hive of people working according to the dictates of an elite. So the substitution of the word employment for work has effected a critical change in the kind of aspirations we set for our society. It's comparable to the departure from the old concept of a personnel department to a human resources department. Human resources are cogs in a machine, servants of somebody else's will. Employment is a characteristic of a planned society, and a planned society is what the banking fraternity, the people who actually create out of nothing the money that a modern society needs in order to function, desire. The Fabian socialists were well connected with the British establishment and with banking interests, and the terminology they evolved in order to describe the society of the future has served the interests of these powers that be, who do not see themselves as being employed, but rather as being the prescribers of the form society will take. And this is where the issue of money comes into the picture. Because you can exert yourself, you can work more or less for the purpose of acquiring income. But when you are employed, primarily you are engaging in activity for the purposes of acquiring income. As the banks are the ultimate manufacturers of the money that serves as people's income, the promotion of the concept of employment puts them in a reigning position within society. It is spiritually and mentally unhealthy for an individual to be subservient to the will of another person. It inhibits their personal growth and allows their natural talents to rust. Seeing people as doing work or producing works is compatible with conceiving of them as important in themselves, divine creations with precious aspirations and important purposes. But seeing individuals as parts of a grand scheme of employment diminishes their value, and indeed, to the extent that there are many of them, appears to render a large number irrelevant. And thus, tyrannies often are run by persons who have no compunction about destroying large numbers of other people. Thus, we can see how critically important is getting our terminology about human economic activity straight. This terminology has been intentionally perverted and subverted in order to drive the concept of the human individual down the scale of significance. So when we see use of the terms work and employment as being virtually synonymous, we are on a hazardous course. What the synonymity of these terms involves is a phenomenon that has been implanted in all aspects of modern culture, something that the active mind will detect in every form of modern media. The term used commonly to describe it is cognitive dissonance. It is the juxtaposition of incompatible concepts, which are suggested can subsist in harmony, but which in fact cannot be logically reconciled. Confronted with such incompatibles, the passive mind is immobilized, is placed in a condition of paralysis. This is where the people who aspire to plan society centrally want the minds of the vast majority of the population to be.
Another point to bear in mind is that the concept of employment is the basis for statistics keeping, which is the basis of a surveillance society. If you have people working on their own initiative and creating individual works in accordance with their own intentions and aspirations, then the state cannot really monitor all these individual actions. But if you have employment being imposed as a governmental policy, then the situation is completely different. They can put everybody into a statistical batch of one kind or another, and you end up with the keepers of these statistics playing with them and drawing fantastic conclusions from them. A fine example of this is a statement not long ago by the governor of the Bank of Canada, in which he said that the Canadian economy is running at about 99% of capacity. If you think about this for 2 seconds, it's laughable. How many employees would insist that they are working at 99% of their capacity? How many factory owners would allege that their factories are working at 99% of their capacity? How many farmers who are under supply management, which limits their ability to produce, would argue that they are producing to 99% of their capacity? It's sheer lunacy. But these are the games that are played by these centralizers who aspire to plan society. And they do it through this perverse concept of employment, around which they build so much of their statistical analysis.